My main goal on this trip to the Karoo semi-desert, which receives slightly more rainfall on average than true deserts, was to get footage for a short conceptual travel video that I titled Transformations on the Road. You can watch it here. My final objective was to take the Matingsport Pass through the Black Mountains, which forms a natural barrier between the Little Karoo and the drier Great Karoo semi-deserts by blocking water moisture from the coast that made it past the Langeberg and Outeniqua mountain ranges and across the Little Karoo. The Outeniqua mountain range separates the semi-tropical coastal region of the Garden Route, where I began my journey, from the Little Karoo. My journey therefore reveals striking variations in climate, vegetation, and scenery. I knew about this dirt road to Willowmore on the other side of Matingsport, which already has the Great Karoo feeling that I'm looking for, and which saved me the trouble of traveling further for footage. This road starts at the turnoff to Klaarstroom, a small and isolated desert village that was the closest place on my route to stop for coffee and to see if I could get some extra material out of the day. The entrance to the village is practically a tarred road through a farm gate, which is charming, and to my right I see the Padstal as advertised online. My drive through the village is pleasant. The buildings are quite beautiful, interesting and well maintained. I drive through the entire village in the blink of an eye, however, and I'm forced to make a U-turn before reaching a dead end in the informal settlement beyond. As you can see, Klaarstroom is a very small village. It takes about 2 minutes to drive from one end to the other, and as is often the case with these villages, there's an informal settlement on the outskirts. I park in front of the Klaarstroom Hotel and walk down the street to get some footage and a feeling for the town. I'm feeling the heat of a sunny desert day in late November, however, and the streets are deserted, except for the occasional car, a tractor, and a man working and coughing every now and again in one of the gardens. So I quickly return to the car with the air conditioner blowing cold air on the highest setting. I'm quite tired from driving and filming all day in the desert heat, and I'm not hungry or thirsty, even for coffee. I have half a mind to get the last shots that I need for the conceptual video and return to the comfort of home. If I wasn't making these videos, I would most likely have turned back. The town has an interesting history from what I read, however, so I try my luck at the hotel, where I'm immediately rewarded with Francis, who seems to have been waiting for the camera.
So ons hotel is in 1874. Staan hy al, so hy is die jaar 150 jaar oud. Destijds was het een herberg in de 19e eeuw, was het een herberg geweest wat hulle gemaakt het, maar na dit was de winkel en een huis. In 2013 het hulle weer oorgesit na een hotel toe. En dan dus ook een politiestasie hier, hy is 164 jaar oud. En Klaarstroom se naam komt van Klaarstroom af. So destijds het hulle in die oudheid wolge was hier bij ons en dan het het deurgevat na Mosselbaai per Ossewa. Soos julle kan sien, is onze bar ook uit de Ossewa uitgemaakt van destijds.
I will later learn more from Charles and Hannah Ferreira, who own the Tolbos Trading Restaurant on the other side of Matingsport in De Rust. They used the front part of the building as their business and the rest as their home, and they were kind enough to invite me in when they saw me coming up the steps to look around, even though they weren't officially open for the day. The wool washing facility in Klaarstroom, which was built in 1874 by Percy John Alport, a Canadian entrepreneur with large business interest in the area, was the first of its kind in South Africa. It took advantage of the abundance of clear mountain water to provide a valuable service to wool farmers and traders in the region. It also played an important ecological role by washing out seeds from the Great Karoo that got stuck when the sheep were grazing, which would otherwise disturb the endemic plant life in the Little Karoo on the other side of the poort. Care was therefore also taken not to return the water used for washing wool to the Groot Rivier, which translates to Great River, that runs past the village and onwards through Matingsport, whose magnificent gorge it has carved over geological time. From Klaarstroom, the Karoo wool was transported by ox wagons through Matingsport and onwards to the closest harbour in Mossel Bay, from where it was exported to both local and international markets. Most of this wool was exported to England, whose textile boom at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution was causing a wool boom in the Karoo, which transformed the region into the largest producer of merino wool in the world. The importance of Mossel Bay as a commercial port decreased as the country's transportation infrastructure was upgraded with a railroad and, eventually, motorized vehicles, which rerouted trade to larger ports like Port Elizabeth and Cape Town. The wool washing facility in Klaarstroom has also been closed for a long time. The village is hidden from the highway, and most motorists pass it by unnoticed on their way to popular holiday destinations in the garden route. Charles and Hannah are especially well connected with people in the area and informed about things to do and see, so I pick up a wealth of information in the hour or so that I spend with them. The story that has been emerging from my adventure has also inspired me to do more research when I get home. Even though Klaarstroom is a small and isolated desert village, I realize that its story can't be understood outside the context of the broader history of South Africa. My journey creating this video about my quick stopover in Klaarstroom has therefore led to an unexpected level of intimacy with the country. Klaarstroom was established on farmland 2 years after the Mermaid Pass was completed and 200 years after South Africa was colonized by the Dutch East India Company, which in Dutch was called the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, or VOC for short. The VOC established a halfway station where Cape Town is today on the journey between Europe and Asia in 1652. European sailors had to circumnavigate Africa to travel to Asia until the Suez Canal was completed in 1869. This was the only alternative to the overland spice route, so called because spices were the main import from Asia, which was already thousands of years old and controlled by regional rulers and traders who imposed hefty taxes. The Dutch government strategically used the VOC, which was the first modern multinational company and also the first company to issue publicly traded stocks, to establish and control maritime trade routes with Asia, including the planned halfway station at the Cape. The VOC was granted powers akin to those of a state, which included the power to negotiate treaties, establish colonies, and even to engage in warfare to achieve its goals. The government furthermore guaranteed the VOC a monopoly over all trade along this route. The VOC progressively acquired land in the Cape, including the land where Klaarstroom was eventually built, from the Khoisan hunter-gatherers and semi-nomadic pastoralists in what became the Western Cape, and later from Bantu-speaking chiefdoms in what became the Eastern Cape, through a combination of trade, force, negotiation, and conquest. The VOC developed the land they acquired agriculturally to serve the needs of their ships by awarding farms, which included freehold farms and loan farms, to so-called vryburgers, which translates to free citizens, who eventually became the Afrikaners, also known as the Boers. The VOC chose the first vryburgers from employees who had served them long and loyally and were considered to be of good character. As the needs of the colony grew, the VOC also awarded vryburger status to other Europeans, mainly Germans and French Huguenots, who assimilated into the Boer culture of the original Dutch settlers. Farmers grew crops mostly for sale to the VOC on terms that the VOC drafted, but they were also given a certain allowance for free trade. The distinction between freehold farms and loan farms eventually became blurred, with many of the loan farms also becoming the private property of vryburgers. Petrus Oosthuizen, who owned the farmland on which Klaarstroom was built, saw the need for a village because of the Mermaid Pass that was completed in 1858, and he is credited with going out of his way to take the first steps. Land for Klaarstroom was surveyed and subdivided into erven, which is Dutch for plots of land, with the first erven being sold in 1860. The fact that these first plots didn't include water rights didn't deter buyers, who weren't planning to make money from agriculture, but rather from business activity along the new trade route. The first buildings included 3 general dealers, 2 smithies, a mill, butchery, and the hotel where Francis now works 150 years after it first opened for business. The Dutch and British governments fought a series of conflicts over control of the Cape Colony. This happened as the Napoleonic Wars raged in Europe, and the Netherlands was experiencing severe political instability and military weakness at home under the regime known as the Batavian Republic, which was basically a puppet state of France. The British first occupied the Cape Colony in 1795, which was cemented with their victory at the Battle of Blouberg against the Dutch government in 1806, and which eventually led to the Dutch government formally ceding the colony to Britain in 1814. Many Boers later migrated inland to escape British governance during the Groot Trek, which translates to the Great Trek, with which they established independent republics in the interior of the country, such as the Orange Free State and the South African Republic, or Transvaal. The 2 Anglo-Boer Wars followed several decades later when the British tried to annex the independent Boer territories. The Boers were victorious during the First Anglo-Boer War, but they were eventually forced to engage in guerrilla warfare during the Second Anglo-Boer War due to superior British numbers and supplies, which ended with British control over both Boer republics. Klaarstroom's main action took place during the Second Anglo-Boer War in February 1901, when Boer commandants Gideon Skeepers and Denise Reitz captured a British messenger outside Klaarstroom on their way through the Black Mountains to rejoin Jan Smuts' raiders. They learned of troops at the nearby hotel, which was a popular stopover for soldiers during the wars, and a garrison at Meiringspoort. With a group of over 300 men, led by Lieutenant Fani Swanepoel, they responded by smashing the telegraph at the post office and looting the government stores. A party of 25 Boer soldiers came to the Klaarstroom Hotel that night, demanded supper, cigars and whiskey, and made a terrible ruckus until the early morning hours. The British responded the next day by sending men to investigate. The men retreated when they realized they were outnumbered by the Boers, who pursued them. This led to a skirmish in which the Boers shot the horses out from under the British soldiers at a nearby farmstead called the Remhoogte. In a small desert village like Klaarstroom, your perceptions are nevertheless not dominated by civilization, but rather by the natural environment. The desert environment of the Karoo makes it clear that human history, and particularly Western history, is only a recent occurrence here. The shortest and most accurate description of this place I've read is the subtitle of the Klaarstroom entry in the Karoo Cameo series, produced by the Karoo Development Foundation to promote the region, in which the authors describe the village as an ancient place of clear waters. With the Black Mountain Range forming the backdrop to the village, you don't have to look far to recognize that this place is extremely ancient. This mountain range, which forms part of the Cape Fold Mountains, was created when the sedimentary layers of largely quartzitic sandstone in the area were thrust upward and folded by tectonic forces over millions of years, when the region was still part of the supercontinent, Gondwana. The Karoo is an important area for paleontology and geology, particularly for the Permian to the Jurassic periods, when Gondwana was fragmenting into various landmasses, including South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, India, Madagascar, and New Zealand, and the Karoo was transitioning from being an inland sea to a more terrestrial environment, which included floodplains and swampland, before it later transformed into an arid landscape. The rich fossil deposits of the Karoo include dinosaurs from the late Triassic to the early Jurassic periods, as well as theropsids, commonly described as mammal-like reptiles, which provide a crucial link in our understanding of the evolutionary transition from reptiles to mammals. The well-preserved sedimentary layers of the region also give us insight into the large extinction events that ended the Permian and Triassic periods. The Karoo is home to several internationally renowned paleontologists who have used this rich natural heritage as a springboard to create successful careers, including the amateur paleontologist Roy Wisthuizen from the Swartskraal farm outside Klaarstroom, who is respected internationally and has several fossils named in his honor. The description of Klaarstroom as an ancient place of clear waters is also apt because the Black Mountain Range has for millions of years been a major water catchment area in this part of the Karoo as it transitioned to a semi-arid climate. Water vapor carried inland from the coast condensates against the mountain range, running together into rivulets that join into streams and rivers carried by gravity down the grooves, channels, ravines, and gorges that it has cut into the rock over geological time. This water eventually makes its way out of the mountains in these higher-lying areas of the interior back to the coast. The abundance of life-giving water and fertile soil amidst the desert environment is visible in the greenery of the hence valuable farmland, which, on the scale of geological time, only very recently started supporting human life, and particularly Western industry. For thousands of years, these mountains would have been important to semi-nomadic Khoi pastoralists in need of pastures and water for their livestock, and we know from cave paintings in the protected cliff overhangs and caves that they were important to hunter-gatherers. European farmers have traditionally grown various plants here, including field crops, vineyards, and orchards, and they maintained livestock, including sheep and goats. The local vines that were planted yielded grapes of such excellent quality that the region quickly became known as the Constantia of the Karoo. From the beginning, farmers in the region distilled witblits, South Africa's version of moonshine, which is also known as white lightning or firewater. It was customary to pour visitors a shot of witblits upon arrival in Klaarstroom, and it was historically also used medicinally, including for herbal infusions. The region has also become an important area for olive production. According to Charles and Anna, it's easy to find places for boreholes in the area because of the abundant groundwater, and water has a tendency to just stand where it falls because the ground is saturated. One still feels the immense age and power of the landscape, even though it has been significantly tamed by agriculture and industry. Names of local geographical features, like the Olifantsrivier, which translates to Elephant River, and which originates in this stretch of the Black Mountains, echoes a relatively recent history when big game still roamed the South African landscapes. And especially in places like the Black Mountains, where water was abundant, the landscape bloomed with indigenous life. There are various game reserves in the region where you can still consistently observe wildlife, including members of the Big Five, and get an insight into what the South African landscape used to look like before the growth of Western civilization in this part of the world. Today, however, one of the big stories around town is sightings of leopards in the area. Leopards are naturally solitary, independent and elusive, and the only big cats to have successfully evaded South Africa's growth in territories where they have been able to retreat into remaining wilderness areas such as the mountains. According to workers at the trailhead to the Mermaid waterfall, 3 leopards are regularly being sighted in the poort, with a mother and cub pair and an independent father whose territory encompasses theirs. There are also baboons, smaller cats like caracal, and smaller animals like dassies on the rocks, water mongoose and Cape clawless otter around the water, and small and large antelope, including klipspringer, and even the large and magnificent kudu that still freely roam this ancient landscape. Cave paintings by the San Bushmen in the Black Mountains also express the region's indigenous abundance with their natural images. According to Charles and Hannah, there are cave paintings in Maringspoort that only come to life when you splash water on the rock face. The area is also naturally prone to flooding. The most recent flood initiated the latest series of road repairs, which I encountered on my way through Maringspoort, and which earlier halted my progress on the dirt road to Willowmore. The flood caused significant damage, with river levels comparable to the 1996 floods that stand out in recent memory. Francis tells me that the Maringspoort and Swartberg passes were closed, which effectively cut them off from the Little Karoo, so that they had to buy everything this side of the mountain in Prince Albert. There is a local myth about a mermaid called Eporia, who lives in the bottomless pool at the foot of the Maringspoort waterfall, and whose life is intimately connected to water and floods in the region. I find it odd that this is the only myth in the area despite its rich history and its magnificent, enchanting geology. I think it's mostly explained by the fact that the Europeans who settled this land were no longer connected to the old country, as Europe is often sentimentally called in the context of the European diaspora. Most European cultures, despite their early roots in paganism, have also been firm Christians for almost 2,000 years who don't bother with such things. I nevertheless also find it apt that this lone myth of the region should concern its life-giving waters, and that it's an instance where European and indigenous influences meet. Local communities with indigenous ancestry have preserved the story of the mermaid, which is also suggested by Khoisan myths and rock paintings in the region, and it has become part of the tapestry of the mainstream culture. There are different versions of the mermaid myth, but they all share the same basic storyline connecting her to floods in the region and drownings, particularly those that occur in the pool at the foot of the waterfall, which is a popular swimming spot. During the major floods of 1996, the story spread that the mermaid had washed out to sea from her home in Maringspoort. It was also during this flood that a local clairvoyant made contact with the mermaid and established that her name is Eporia. The story goes that Eporia was caught in a fisherman's net in Mossel Bay, whereafter she was taken to the C.P. Nel Museum in Oudtshoorn. A mannequin, decorated as a mermaid, was hung from the clock tower of the museum to represent Eporia, and because of all the public interest generated by the story in Oudtshoorn, which is home to the annual Kleinkurre Nationale Kunstefees, where local artists subsequently picked up the myth, the curator called the police to ceremoniously return Eporia to her home in Maringspoort. I order a cappuccino from Frances that she kindly serves on the house. While I'm sitting on the stoop, staring out over the buildings on the opposite side of the street with their windmills and the Black Mountain Range beyond, I'm reminded of my experience in New Bethesda, another Karoo village, which I visited twice, spending several days on both occasions. I'm overwhelmed by the stillness of the desert village that has the remarkable power to empty my mind of thoughts, an effect that is as much part of the village as the buildings and the windmills. The effect is created by some combination of the isolation of the village, the vast emptiness of the desert environment, which upon closer inspection is teeming with life, and the power of the mountains. A police officer from the station across the road, whom I didn't film, had some business at the hotel. Walking past my table on his way out the front gate, he independently comments on the peace of the village without me saying anything. He shares that he lives permanently in George and stays in Klaarstroom temporarily to work, and he also comes back to rest. According to Francis, the village is extremely safe, with practically zero crime. Francis tells me that there are only 5 families living permanently in Klaarstroom today, and most of the other buildings are holiday and retirement homes. One of the permanent residents of the village is local legend Koos Roots, the South African filmmaker with an international career, who shot several movies in the village and in the end decided to stay. I expected if I asked Koos Roots and the other permanent residents of Klaarstroom, or the travelers and holiday makers who find their way to the Karoo, what they see in the village, what I'm currently feeling will be central to their answer. I allow myself to indulge in the peace of the village for a while, and then consciously pull back from it. I just want more of this feeling, but it's time to get the last footage and head home. I console myself that I will return at some point and stay a night in Klaarstroom to finish the thought born of this feeling, which is vast and empty on the surface, like the desert, and oceanic underneath, like the rivers and aqueducts of the mountains whose water eventually finds its way back to the sea.